the role of youth in restoring the village, right? Where is the role, or I should say, the responsibility of adults with regard to youth in restoring the village, right? Youth play a very vital role in our community, but youth must be prepped to fulfill that role. Youth must be developed and supported to go on to grow and become the adults in our community, to be the next generation to lead our community and our society. So I'm going to be talking about that, and I'm going to be referencing primarily my original discussion about the role of the youth in restoring the village from 2019. But I'm going to start it off this evening by talking about some research from the Journal of Negro Education, which is a publication of Howard University. This is from volume 61, number 4, from 1992. And it's a passage that deals with the rites of passage movement, talking about a resurgence in African-centered practices for socializing black youth in America. And what it means by that is African-centered is to create a cultural pedagogy, so to speak, but is a living, breathing, walking life culture in our community that is centered around the black cultural experience, the homopathic cultural experience, the historical, rooted, connected experience, centering that as a ceremonial, customary, and traditional rites of passage, the institutionalization of practices in our community to socialize our youth, meaning to give our youth something to have a social uniformity around, right? So they'll have a sense of who they are, what values are placed in them, what values and responsibilities society expects of them, right? And so, creating an African-centered or a black-centered, a cultural-centered, a culturally relevant and culturally specific centered of practices for socializing youth is what I'm talking about. And so I'm going to read from the original research, I don't want to say original research, take that back, from this article from 1992. And this is from Mfinga Warfield Kopak. And it says, the educational systems in different kinds of societies in the world have been and are very different in organization and content. They are different because societies providing the education are different, and because education, whether it be formal or informal, has a purpose. That purpose is to transmit from one generation, right, to the next, the accumulated wisdom and knowledge of the society, and to prepare the young people for their future membership of the society and their active participation in its maintenance or development, right? And that's crucial and key to understand when it talks about what is happening with our youth today, because our youth are disconnected from that kind of generational transmission of knowledge and wisdom. Why? Because for one, we lack agency, particularly the black community. We lack agency over our educational institutions in terms of the educational paradigm that our children are enveloped in. We lack control over that system and institution. And because we lack control over that system and institution, and because by systematic design, our children have been marginalized and kept from actually accumulating or accessing a parity and equity in education, so that generational knowledge and wisdom and things that we were just reading from would be transmitted to our youth, so that our youth would have a sense of purpose, a sense of awareness and place in society, something they totally lack today, right? And that's because we don't have a culturally relevant, culturally centered cultural rites or practices for them, right? They don't have any cultural uniformity. Instead, we see our children forming their own groups, their own rites of passages, their own street gangs and families and familial organizations and structures. And they form those because we as a society, we as a black community, we as a cultural society, we have failed to create those institutions in our society. Why? Because, in fact, we've given up agency over them by allowing us to be assimilated into the dominant society's cultural institutions and practices, in which in all actuality removes our children from being centered in that, right? We are not the center and focus. We're not prioritized. And because we're not prioritized, we're constantly marginalized on the side, right? We're constantly left to the side, and as a result of that, black children, black boys and girls as a whole continue to see that we suffer from the lowest statistical performance indicators along the spectrum, right? In health outcomes, in education, academic outcomes, right? In employment, right? And in civic and society, we lack agency there, right? And because we're marginalized for far too long, too often, we have to actually create something that really centers us, that gives us a central focus and aim as a people, right? So that we can rebuild and refocus. So because our educational systems and institutions are exclusionary of us, right, and do not center us and do not prioritize us, it becomes critical. And what the Rites of Passage movement advocates is that we as a community must institutionalize our own socialization of our children, of our youth. So therefore, we must institutionalize and create our own cultural and academic institutions, so to speak, from within, so that we can raise our children with some cultural uniformity, so that our children will have a sense of purpose, a sense of value, right? And understand and be appreciated for who they are and know what they are, what's to be expected of them in society. Because we're a fractured community and society, and we kind of belong here and there and don't really have a real genuine sense of focus and purpose and uniformity, right? We have no real genuine consensus, right? Politically, socially, right? Just ethologically, we have no real genuine tapestry of focus. We are a kaleidoscope that is magnified, where you can see all of our differences. And this is one of the fundamental failures within the black community right now, is that it's critical that we must create a very centered, purpose-driven, and cultural unity, right, within our communities, where we buy black and circulate dollars amongst the community, and we rebuild and reinvest within our communities, because other communities are doing that. And when other communities do that, in the communities which we live in, when they do that, we're constantly excluded, right? We're the smallest of the business owner sector, right? The smallest population of those in upper management positions. We are the smallest, and we're not necessarily the smallest population. We are a formidable population, right? We are, if we're 20 to 25 to 30% of our city's population, we are a formidable population. And that gives us actual standing. That gives us real economic standing. It gives us real political standing. It gives us real social standing. But it's up to us to unify that standing, right? To weave that standing throughout our community as a weaved fabric village, right? Because that's the topic of this conversation too, as a matter of fact. Because if we are really to advance ourselves and fit in society, we have to recognize that no matter what, we are still going to be a separate group of society. No matter what we attain in life, no matter what position we are in life, we're still a part of the black community, right? And that means that we still should be sharing a cultural identity, a cultural purpose, right? A vision as a community, and we must come together to do so. Now, we recognize that there's going to be many differences along the route, but if we as a people are centering ourselves as a priority, then anybody who is working against centering us as a priority is really not, the issue isn't that we have problems among us, they are the problem. The issue isn't that we are disunited among us. The issue is that we are allowing people who are not prioritizing us and valuing us enough to be loyal to our community, to prioritize us as a community. When that doesn't happen, then, it's not just a simple matter of there's some type of conflict within our community. That's another issue in all actuality. And it's really an issue of betrayal within our community. And that is not only that difficult to address in our community, right? But it is time sensitive, very fragile, right? And critical that our community really pay attention and be aware of how we really build a social, strong, cohesive community that is inclusive of community, that puts the community first, right? Not policies and agendas and practices of institutions that have existed in our community that want to really essentially dictate to us what we can do and what we can't do, and when we can have conversations about really prioritizing the black community. We can no longer allow them to prioritize our agenda. We have to prioritize our agenda and put us at the forefront of our agenda, because that's what's going to save our community. That's what's going to center our children for the next generation to be prioritized. Right? When we prioritize community and prioritize our children's future first, instead of politics and policies and practices of institutions that actually continue to harm us, right? And so, in talking about the rites of passage movement, and the quote that I read from, it's critical to understand that as Singer mentioned, let me read this a little bit portion of it again, because Singer says, the educational systems in different kinds of societies in the world have been and are very different in organization and content. They are different because societies providing the education are different, and because education, whether it be formal or informal, has a purpose. The purpose is to transmit from one generation to the next the accumulated wisdom and knowledge of the society, and to prepare the young people for their future membership of the society and their active participation in its maintenance or development, right? So that is the key that we're talking about here, is that how do we focus on that purpose of rechanneling and refocusing and transmitting generational knowledge and cultural hegemony from our communities, right? And prioritizing our agenda and issues that puts the development of our community first, right? This is the kind of conversation that the Rites of Passage movement is talking about, how we center the African-centered or cultural-centered practices for socializing black youth in our community. And that's an important conversation to have. So I wanted to revisit that today and revisit my lecture from 2019, the role of youth in restoring the village. And so I'm going to get started with that piece, having given that prefatory material. So the importance of youth in restoring the village. Children, in fact, are our future. We recognize that. Children have been, we've made songs about children are our future. And though we fail to fundamentally live up to that, we still put that as a marker, as a milestone of our goals and aspirations, right? Because each generation passes their knowledge and legacy to each successive generation. And that's what is meant by children are our future. When we say children are our future, we're saying that what we're doing today is to build a greater future for the children. What we're doing today is going to support and protect and nurture the next generation of children. So our children, in fact, have a right to protection and nurturing, right? They have a right to be prioritized because they didn't, in fact, ask to be here. When we were born into this world, we didn't ask to be here. We should have been coming into this world with the kind of protection and nurturing that a society, that a village needs to sustain us, right, when we are born. And likewise, we have to have that same priority and that same agenda for the next generation. So they have a right to protection, right? And therefore, their success depends on the level of support they receive from adults, right? Their success depends on the level of support they receive from us. So therefore, if our support is lacking, if we have what we call selfish motives and priorities that prioritize us, right, as adults, and in our interests, our special interests, and our financial interests, and our professional interests, and our career interests, and our positional interests, and those things come into play in politics and educational systems and civics, etc. Right? And when those things come into play, the success of our future children is at stake, because their success depends on the level of support they receive from us during that nurturing and protection stage. So the policies, the laws, the way we raise, the way we build society, all those things we must take into consideration tomorrow, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how our children are going to be impacted, right? Because given the role of responsibility to lead the next generation, that is a fundamental right and a fundamental responsibility of us as adults, right? Because we have a role and a responsible role to lead the next generation, right? That is critical to understand the concept that children are, in fact, our future. Now, how do we bring our youth up? How do we build them? How do we build our youth to be the recipients of being the future, right? So they will be prepared to take their reign in society. First, we must consistently show them several different things. We must, at that nurturing and growing stage when we are raising children up, right? We must show them consistently love, right? We have to instill love in them because we know what hate does. We've been bred in hate. And so it's our responsibility to raise the next generation not to hate, right? But also we must show them that we deeply, truly care about them. And we show them we care about them when we actually invest in them and when the outcomes of our actions shows that it benefits them. That's when care is really there. When the outcome doesn't show that we care about them, when the outcome produces a result of them being harmed by our decisions and actions, that doesn't show care to our children. So first and foremost, once again, we must consistently show love to them. When children know that they are loved and they feel that sense of belonging, right, that opens their heart up to be cared for. And then thirdly, we must believe in them. We must begin, because when we start believing in them and trusting them, that's when we begin to show them or give them the independence, because we love them and care about them. And the next thing is to believe in them, because that gives them the next stage of their life when they go on to become independent, right? When they grow into their adolescence and grow on to begin practicing those lessons that we teach them in life as they grow. As they begin learning and applying each of those lessons, and we show them we believe in them, we're trusting them. That's what belief in them means. It means we're trusting in them, right? We're giving them the opportunities to make mistakes, to learn lessons from them. Because what follows that is commitment. Because we show that we are committed to their success and happiness, so that when they do in fact make mistakes, by us trusting in them, we are there to support them, not to just punish them and chide them for any of their failures, but because it's a lesson to be learned, right? And see, that's why, for example, in schools, the whole detention system and the suspension system in itself, there's no lesson in that by depriving them of access and opportunity to be in the educational environment. See, so when we build a centered, a culturally relevant and culturally centered rites of passage for our children, those aren't things that we include, because we include a restorative justice, right? Inclusionary justice, so that when in fact someone commits some form of misbehavior in our community or in our school setting, in our family and structure setting, that is in violation of the norms that we want to teach them, we don't punish them, so to speak, right? We hold them accountable by teaching them the fundamental lessons, and them giving them the responsibility to make the correction, and giving them the responsibility by believing in them, right? By being committed to their success and happiness, by giving them the opportunity to lead in the institution of the justice, the restoration of the justice. And that's what restorative justice is all about, by formulating a real inclusive society in which the adults, right, which the elders, the adults, and the youth that are growing into these stages, they all work together in synchronization, right? And that's how you build up our youth. And that's what building up youth is all about. So finally, their rites of passage, right? When we say their rites of passage, right, when our youth's tradition and customary practices, right, those things that allow them to formulate and understand responsibility and practice, have opportunities to practice responsibility, right? It's called a rites of passage, and something that we haven't had within our community since we've been in America, essentially, right? Those things were slowly but surely pulled from us. We weren't allowed to practice cultural idioms of this nature, cultural practices and rooted systems that was important to sustaining our life vein, sustaining our cultural life, right? And so, the movement to restore rites of passage in our community should be critical today, in light of, particularly because we know our educational systems aren't inclusive of us, which is why we have a total lack of the presence of black educators in our community, and really the lack of culturally relevant educational curriculum that speaks truth to history and speaks truth to science and civics, right, and things of that nature, right, that our children would need, our children, particularly black children, who don't share the same overall cultural paradigm as white society. We just simply have two different communities, right? And that's the reality. Although we are integrated and share systems and things of this nature, we still have two separate cultures that that most of us still don't understand between of each other, right? So it's important that we understand that. So the African rites of passages, or I don't say the African, because it's not so much as African in the African continent, so to speak, because we talk about the black diaspora. That is, black people have been all over this planet Earth, everywhere, you know what I mean? South and Central America, long before Europeans ever came over here and ever attempted to go back to Africa and bring anybody over here. Black people, melanated people were already here with culturally centered roots, cultural practices, right? So that's what we're referring to, is the restoration of those practices, those aboriginal practices, so to speak, that was taken from us. And many of us don't know which specific of those rites of passage were there, so we've lost some of that. So that's what this conversation is about rebuilding that, reconnecting to that. And so the rites of passage is about, the African American or the black male adolescent rites of passage processes aimed at instilling, for example, a strong and positive sense of self and achievement in black youth, right? And returning a sense of empowerment to black families and communities, right? So let me say that again. I'm looking at this PowerPoint that's in front of me from a lecture I gave for my notes, right? So the black adolescent rites of passage, or the African American youth or adolescent rites of passage process, the process involved is aimed at instilling a strong, positive sense of self and achievement. Positive sense of self and achievement, that I can achieve all that I dream to achieve in life, that I can aspire a great vision. I can be a great visionary and achieve that, and so that, building and instilling a strong positive sense of self and achievement in the African American black youth, and returning a sense of empowerment to African American families and communities, meaning that if we have a sense of power in our community, empowerment, that we have control over the future of our children, making sure that, that we know our children are going to be safe, that we know our children are going to have their needs met, right? That we know that we're providing access and support and opportunity for their education, and that we know that their education that's being provided for them within our community, that in fact it meets the cultural standards that centers them and is relevant and culturally sensitive and open and understanding and really focused on achieving a result of education for them, right? That's what that is about, by empowering the black communities to feel that sense of power and to actually own that agency and to operationalize that agency. And that's what restoring rites of passage means in the black community. And so this talk that I gave in 2019, that I'm kind of paraphrasing and referencing tonight, is critical to me in the work that I do and have been working in schools and juvenile centers and communities, right? It's critical because children, we understand. It's factual that we believe and we know, based on our experience, that our children don't have a sense of purpose, that they're what we call lost, right? And that's not their fault. They're children. We shouldn't be holding them accountable for being 12 and 13 years old, 9 and 10 years old, and holding them responsible for creating youth culture and creating a responsible youth-driven society. That's our responsibility as adults. That's flatly and squarely our total responsibility as adults to build that and create that in our community for our children. But when we're up against systems and policies and practices that have been rooted in systems, white supremacist systems, harmful, discriminatory and biased practices and systems that have been maintained, right? And then when certain black people get in power and position of those same systems, they maintain the same disparate outcomes in our community. We are up against great odds. So it becomes all that more increasingly important that we learn how to center our children's focus and future, right? How to take African-centered rights or culturally relevant and culturally focused paradigms within our community to build for our community, right? It's important that we instill these things in our community, we institutionalize them ourselves. And so you say, well, how do we do that? Well, what does that look like, and et cetera? Well, that's a big process in itself, right? And a part of that process is really, it starts in educating our community as a whole. We need to focus on our African, I don't want to keep using the word African as I'm talking about just the continent per se, because black folks were in this country and enslaved in this country and then castigated as African cargo brought over here, whereas black Africans were already here for hundreds and thousands of years, who were enslaved, who were aboriginal to this land for hundreds of years, whom sometimes are castigated as Native Americans, but were really black folks here. So I'm talking about African-centered and black-centered. I'm talking about all that cosmological point of view and perspective, right? Because we're not sure who comes from where, when, and how, because we just know that they've hit our history. So it's important to understand that as we seek to build this in our community, that the educational component about what makes up, our historical, overall generational knowledge of who we are as a people, all the way to Africa, to Central America, to New Zealand, to Australia, to wherever we have been, we need to reinstill that sense of historic knowledge and understanding of who we are and how we connected to all of that. And then all of our other multicultural connections, we need to center that first and foremost, right? And then secondly, we have to start institutionalize cultural practices that celebrate us, that celebrate our achievements, right? Things that, for example, celebrate a young boy growing into a manhood. There's in African cultures and societies and Native cultures and societies, Aboriginal cultures and societies, there are practices, right, that young men, young children, young women go through. We've even tried to create some things that we've modeled after European structure, like the debutantes and things of that nature. But those are modeled after European systems. See, that's why we're still lost and divided, because we're adopting Eurocentric systems in our life. We have to adopt Afrocentric, right? Black-centric in our life. And that doesn't mean that means we're against white culture. No, we support people who love and believe in their own culture. You know what I'm saying? The Irish that love their culture, you know what I'm saying? And anybody else, the English that love their culture, that's fine. That's what life is about, appreciating and valuing everybody for who they are. But we aren't Irish. You know what I'm saying? So why should we be celebrating all the Irish celebrations and holidays in America, and those aren't our practices and traditions that we aren't rooted in? They don't give us a sense of vision of who we are, what we can achieve in life. And that's what we have to institutionalize in our community. It's all about how we, in fact, bring about those cultural traditions that celebrate us and give us a vision of what we can achieve in life, so we have a sense of purpose to aspire for. We're aspiring for all the wrong things. We're aspiring to be dope dealers, you know what I mean? We aspire to be, hustlers in the hood, pimps, you know what I'm saying? Some of us aspire to be, rap stars and athletes, but none of that is really focused vision. All of that is things that have been imposed upon us. Icons and images that have been imposed and visions that have been implanted in us. None of that is birthed from within, right? From within the core soul of who we are as a people, right? So that's why this conversation is important. The role of youth in restoring the village, right? It's important that we center our youth in the forefront, build them up and invest in them, right? And so let's revisit just a couple of these points that I was just discussing. To build our youth up, it's important that we consistently show them love, and that we care about them. We show them that we care about them, and that we believe in them, and that we are committed to their success and happiness, right? Because each generation passes their knowledge and legacy to each successive generation. So, when we pass bad things on to the next generation, that generation picks up those bad things and passes it on. It gets worse and worse. But when we're building positivity and growth, and we build that as a legacy to the next generation, that growth plants and it springs up and it bears fruit. And then they continue to grow from that and replant and bear fruit, right? Because they have a right to protection and nurturing. Our children have a right to be protected and to be nurtured, right? That means that the decisions that we make, that the outcomes of that show them, in fact, that it produces protection and nurturing for them. That it's not something that's going to be harmful for them. That we don't do something to the earth and to the ground that's going to be harmful next 20 years to them and their children, right? That they have a right to protection and nurturing, right? And that because why? Their success depends on the level of support they receive from us. Given our role of responsibility to lead the next generation, that becomes all the more of the central focus for us as a people and as a community. So with that being said, I just wanted to hop on here tonight and talk about the importance of youth in restoring the village, because that is my primary work in the community, has always been focused on the youth. And so, as I elevate my voice in the community as an advocate for for protecting our youth, protecting our village, and restoring our village. It's important that we balance that out. You know what I mean? I know that a lot of you saw my live this morning and seen I was pretty upset about some very important, critical issues that threatens our village. Some of the things that threaten the advancement and progress of building and restoring our village. Sometimes we have to get very aggressive in addressing them and challenging them, because the harm that is produced by that particular situation in itself, by certain individuals working against community members that are working to restore the village, right, to actually reinvest in our community, when in fact certain institutions are harming our community, the outcome and output that they are putting out is actually harming our community. You can't smooth that over with rebuilding schools and rebuilding things and thinking that type of investment is some type of progress. That's not progress, when in fact our children have the same educational academic outcome at the bottom of the barrel and still leave school ill-prepared for society, ill-prepared for the workforce, right? That is inappropriate and unacceptable. So we have people in our village fighting to restore the village and to make sure that our children get a quality education, an education that prioritizes them and truly invests in them, right? You know what I'm saying? That's the type of a village advocate and village leader that we must protect and fight for, period. You know what I'm saying? So while that message was important this morning, this message today is equally important, the importance of youth in restoring the village. So I hope you enjoyed this brief little talk. Share if you will, comment, talk. Matter of fact, let me see if there are any comments real quick. Okay, yes. Nicole, I see you. Yes, the greatest. I appreciate y'all tuning in, tapping in with me. As a matter of fact, y'all was a part of that, Nicole. Y'all was a part of that Restoring That Village series, and I appreciate y'all for coming out. And as many people have asked me to make sure we bring that back, I will be bringing that back. COVID has slowed us down and knocked us off a little bit. I know we're in a virtual world. People are tuning into a lot of live things, and people are migrating from Facebook over to other social media platforms. But it's important, in fact, that we continue to have those conversations and provide platforms in our community for those conversations to actually build the next generation, to build the next village, right? So I salute y'all. Thank y'all for tuning in. Play this back if you missed a lot of it. Been on here about 30 minutes or so, just chopping it up about the importance of youth and restoring the village. You've been here with Hakeem Crampton. One love, salute.